This is a battle like no other, and it's one you won't expect. A husband, a father, loses everything because of a shocking decision from his wife. Jessica, the woman he loved with all his heart, betrayed him without mercy. She left, taking the children and everything he worked for, demanding he leave the house they built together. And that's not all. She wanted another man to adopt their kids. Cold legal documents and ruthless decisions shattered his world overnight. But Ryan didn't give up. He fought back to reclaim what was his. Will Jessica regret her actions? This is a story you can't afford to miss. Dive into the full story now. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. I got up at 7 a.m., showered, got the kids out of bed and prepared their breakfast and school lunches. After that, I woke Jessica up in time for her to load 11-year-old Noah and 8-year-old Olivia onto the school bus. She was fatigued from a late tennis tournament and kissing the kids goodnight. I departed at 8 a.m. to go to work as the foreman of the local authority's construction crew. After a typical day, I returned home shortly after 5 o'clock. Today was payday, so I stopped by an ATM to collect some cash for the weekend. The damn machine ate my card. There's no message or caution. Just refused to give me cash or return my card. It was a bit stupid to put my credit card in to try to acquire cash. Olivia's birthday was on Sunday, and I planned to spend Saturday getting her a unique gift. The damn machine also consumed that. The bank was closed, so I went home. At home, I realized Jessica's car was not in the driveway. I ran to the front door, praying she hadn't forced the kids to return to the empty house. She knew I despised it after the last time I urged her to call me if she needed to do anything vital after school so I could get home early. As I was inserting the key into the lock, a voice emerged from behind me. Mr. David Brown. I turned around and immediately responded yes. A middle-aged man held out to me a yellow A4 envelope with the names Slugged In and Pike in one corner. He held it out for me. Sir, you have been served, and walked away. Confusion did not fit how I felt. I continued into the house. As soon as I entered the house, I thought it was abnormally vacant. 2 minutes later, I noticed that not only were the other 3 members of my family not present, but all of their clothes and things were missing. There was no note or message on the phone, nothing at all. All I had to respond to the confusion that around me was a bloody yellow envelope resting on the kitchen table. I opened it. The first paper, as I quickly found, was a divorce petition. I had never seen one of them before, but the title left no doubt. There were little sticky labels sticking out of the side that read, "Sign here." I didn't bother reading it and moved on to the next document. This one was a little more difficult to understand. I suddenly discovered it stated that I had 2 months to depart my home so that it could be sold. What the hell? The third document was much more difficult to comprehend. It eventually occurred to me. Some guy named Noah Johnson wants to adopt my children, at danger of repeating myself. What the hell? The last document's title left no doubt. The restraining order banned me from coming within 200 yards of my wife, children, or Mr. Noah Johnson's residence at 12 Riverview Drive. Blah, blah, blah. I felt completely lost. The magnitude of the change in my life threatened to crush my soul. Perhaps it would have happened otherwise. For starters, I had no idea the problem was so large that I couldn't tackle it all at once. My innate emotional protection mechanisms kicked in, keeping me sane. My mind was first blank, but morsels of certainty began to filter into my consciousness. My wife had left me to pursue a connection with someone I'd never heard of. She took the children and asked me to let them go so that he might adopt them. She froze all of our shared bank accounts and planned to sell our house to raise the funds. Noah Johnson, her accomplice in crime, lived at 12 Riverview Drive. To make matters worse, I was ashamed of my ignorance. If Jessica had decided to take such a step, then everything had been building up for a long time, and I hadn't seen a single hint. I knew Jessica wasn't very bright, so the only possible conclusion was that I was extremely stupid. I scanned my memory for hints from the past. Sure, Jessica had been rather aloof around 6 months ago, but when I pointed it out to her, she came out of the state she was in, and our life, which had become a shadow of its former beauty, returned with renewed vigor. Furthermore, it returned stronger and more powerful than ever before. I no longer recognized the sexually repressed wife I knew. I didn't recognize the brave madman who entered. I laughed, recalling some of what had been going on in our bedroom recently. Perhaps she had already experienced them with Mr. Johnson. It wasn't Jessica. Solving that difficulty made my veins icy. I now believe she had always wanted to do these things, but her oppressive upbringing prevented her from doing so with someone she respected. The inevitable conclusion to this was both sad and funny. She lost respect for me 6 months ago, which was heartbreaking. Hold that thought, Ryan. You'll need every chance to laugh to get through what lies ahead of you. I was still in disbelief when I decided to take my first action. It came as a surprise to those who hadn't read my most recent psychological evaluation. My employer had the trendy notion to poll all senior staff members. I was proud of a line in their report, "Mr. Brown doesn't exactly follow the rules." It was a subtle way of stating I was a results-oriented cowboy who got the job done with only acceptable guidelines as a reference. This message was followed by the finest professional compliment I had ever received during a performance assessment that year. My supervisor, who was as direct as could be, sat me down and stated, "Ryan, whenever I have a difficult task to complete, I assign it to you." On that day, I recorded in my journal how I believe you will manage it and how long it will take. I'm pleased to add that I've never been mistaken. He then gave me high marks, and we had a wonderful laugh. Unfortunately, it meant nothing because I was already at the top of the tree with my qualifications, and the strain of supporting a wife and children prevented me from finishing my engineering degree and moving on to the next tree. Half an hour later, I was parked near 12 Riverview Drive. Let's just say it wasn't 200 ym. Jessica's automobile was present, but it exhibited no signs of life. It was the most upscale area in our city, as was the mansion. I imagined Johnson's was the same size as any other shop on that block. I suddenly thought the name sounded strangely familiar. Could Noah Johnson be the obnoxious guy in the TV commercials? The one who insisted on appearing in his own advertisements, which rotated every week with tedious regularity. He owns one of the city's few supermarkets. If I recall correctly, he took it over in a hostile takeover approximately 2 years ago. If I was correct, I was in trouble. This man was a prized commodity. The front door opened, interrupting my thoughts. He got out to his car and drove away. I recognized him as the same middle-aged man who had served me a little over an hour earlier. This encouraged me to open the yellow packet I had brought along and read the divorce petition. You might consider this a declaration of war. Jessica demanded absolutely everything: house, car, cashier, alimony, and child support. Furthermore, I would have no access to the children. I knew Jessica was competitive. She not only had to win everything, but she also insisted on crushing her opponents along the way. This petition was typical Jessica. I was still thinking about it when the door reopened 30 minutes later. A well-dressed lady of approximately 40 approached the top step. She stood there as a 50-year-old man pulled a large bag out and set it near her before returning inside and closing the door. The lady stood there for several minutes, clutching a familiar yellow package in her hands. Finally, she rolled her bag up to the gate and began walking down the street towards me. The emotion on her face matched the one in my imagination. Complete perplexity. She approached my car. I walked out in front of her. She came to a halt 2 steps away from me and gazed at me through glassy eyes, which were red from sobbing. She held an envelope in one hand and her suitcase's handle in the other. I simply extended my envelope to her and said, "Snap." She burst into tears after looking at my face, then her own. She remained motionless as I carried her bag into my trunk and kept the door open for her, aware that we were being observed and that the police might be called at any time. I drove down the road, took a few turns, and parked weirdly. The notion that she was in the same situation triggered a protective instinct and cleared my mind a bit. Even with tear-filled eyes, she was a stunning woman who made no indication that she was going to take the initiative. I opened the door. "My name is Ryan, and I think my wife knows your spouse." She turned her grief-stricken gaze to me and smiled softly. As I watched her, I noticed that the grief had subsided a little. "I'm Karen. Is your wife's name Jessica?" I nodded. I discovered them in bed together last month. I thought things were improving between us, and tonight she burst into tears again. I gave her time to settle down. Jessica's complete betrayal of me did not surprise me as much as I had expected. Is there any place I can drop you off with relatives or friends? I have no relatives here and Noah has alienated me from all of my friends. Have you ate yet? She shakes her head. I checked my wallet. Less than $1.50. I drove to a known low-cost eatery and led Karen inside. To make a long story short, we shared our life stories. I was 32 years old, married during my second year of university, and dropped out the following year after falling victim to unsalvageable condoms. Jessica was against abortion, and I had deliberately dropped out to support my family. Jessica did not work, and I believed we had a good marriage. I resented my wife's laziness slightly, but I accepted it in our increasingly selfish world. Jessica appeared to be a dedicated mother in the eyes of others, which irritated me. However, in private, she was carefree and self-centered. I stopped bringing up this poignant topic. I was different in public and private. Please comment number 1 so that I can know that you liked the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a great inspiration and encouragement for us. Thank you very much. Since my parents' deaths, I have cared deeply for my children, and I was the lone child. My family was all that I had. Karen was 41 years old and the daughter of a mother who abandoned her. Her father had done his best, but stress had led him to an early death. Her marriage to the considerably older Noah Johnson had gone well, but it had produced no children. Noah blamed her, refusing to undergo any infertility tests and citing his numerous siblings. Her inheritance was spent on building Noah's firm. Karen went to the ATM across the street from the restaurant, as I suggested, to ensure that none of her cards were still working. The conspirators' attack was meticulous and well-planned. Given enough time, we could have launched a successful counterattack. But for the time being, we were dejected, bewildered, and lost. In retrospect, other people's troubles were the most effective therapy for me at the time. Karen was still unable to prepare for the future, so I encouraged her to stay in my enormous but now vacant house until she had a plan. I informed her that I was simply offering this out of respect. I had no hidden motivation. We drove home and I helped her settle into the guest room. We then shared a bottle of wine. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. When I told her I was scared, I wouldn't be able to see my children as frequently as I wanted, if at all. In fact, she wept tears over my obvious pain, something my upbringing had prohibited me from doing on my own. Our mutual discussion of worries may have been treated as a traditional counseling session. By the end of the first bottle, we had reached some interesting findings. Their efforts were plainly intended to keep us on our toes and discourage us from retaining our own attorneys. Jessica's motivations were unclear, but she was certainly playing to win. As usual, the concept of dividing the children and property equally when our marriage ended was out of character for her, so dissolving the marriage peacefully was out of the question. Karen appeared to be a really decent person who could serve as an emotional ally. We retired to our bedrooms, aware that we were not wholly alone in the world. The following day was spent distracting each other so that the new conditions would not overwhelm us. When she became frustrated, I encouraged her with stories and jokes. When I felt the darkness approaching, she would make me laugh. We had a strange day, but we got through it together. For such a beautiful woman, she was somewhat mysterious. She was strangely shy, with no other source of income. We pooled our money and shopped on a budget. We didn't go hungry for a few weeks. We enjoyed shopping as if we were impoverished. Karen had been in clover since her marriage to Mr. Johnson. It was a clear cultural shock. We started talking about our future goals, but it got too painful. Saturday night, we watched a lovely movie together. Karen was still in bed on Sunday morning when Jessica's father, William, and younger sister, Catherine, arrived unexpectedly. I invited them over for coffee. We had always gotten along nicely. Furthermore, I suspected Catherine had always harbored feelings for me. She had been single for several years since her ex-husband ran off with his secretary. Karen emerged at the kitchen doorway wearing her bathrobe as the coffee brewed. She apologized, evidently mortified to be seen this way. William lifted an eyebrow and stared at me angrily. "Before you disgrace yourself, Dad, this is the wife of the man your daughter is living with. He threw her out of the house on Friday, the day I met her. She had nowhere else to go, so I offered her a place to stay. You see, I'm not the only one your offspring are attempting to crush." "I apologize, Ryan. Jessica's mother was also supposed to come, but she is too embarrassed. We know what Jessica did to you, and I just wanted you to know how angry I am with her. I didn't bother telling her to leave our life, but you know how it is. Grandchildren and all that, correct? I understand, Dad. Thank you for your views. What baffles me the most is why she is doing this. I understand her strategies. Taking all of the money, leaving me with nothing, and taking the house is all part of her winning strategy. But why? The look on his face indicated that he was previously unaware of the money in the residence. His eyes widened. Do you mean she took everything? Yes, Dad. All of our accounts appear to be closed. I do not have a single bean. She gave me a notice to leave the house and barred me from seeing the children. William's eyes widened in terror at what his daughter was capable of. He could not look me in the eyes. I apologize, Ryan. What a scumbag. But I can answer your question. She told my mother and me yesterday why, in a nutshell. Money, she stated. You've already maxed out and she wants more. She believes that sleeping with a wealthy man will provide her with the desired results. He's in his 50s, and from the way she talks about him, I can tell she doesn't really like him. I would be cautious if I were him. Please pause for 2 seconds. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is a great inspiration and encouragement for us. Thank you very much. I believe that once she marries him, she will leave him and grab whatever she can get. I'm not sure how I raised such a mercenary bitch. That's a lot of money, Dad. Her decision not to terminate my first pregnancy caused me to drop out of university. If I had continued, I would be at the top of a tall tree right now, not the top of a little one. William just shrugged. So, Dad, why take the kids? We both know deep down that she isn't a good mother. Why not simply take the money and leave me with my children? I do not know, son. At this time, I noticed Catherine staring at her father incredulously, but she said nothing, clearly humiliated to the degree. William made his final apologies before leaving and shaking my hand. I made him pledge to embrace my kid for her birthday. Catherine held me and whispered into my ear, I will be back in an hour. It was all quite intriguing. Karen and I were eating breakfast when 2 mutual friends of Jessica and mine arrived. They'd noticed Jessica and an older man in the restaurant the night before and wondered what was going on. I presented the matter from my point of view, and Karen told her version. They were both offended by Jessica's actions. They both wondered why she had departed with the children. They had apparently witnessed Jessica put on the nice mommy act in front of other people. We'd just finished giving them the story when one of Jessica's pals arrived. This time we all shared the story. She was as terrified as everyone else. We were not finished when Catherine returned. She grabbed me aside and handed me an envelope. There is $1,000 in there, Ryan. Let us call it atonement for Sister Bitch. No, I insisted. Take it. It was difficult for me as a proud man to take the envelope, but I was desperate. I took it. I really thank her. I also wanted to let you know that Dad has not been totally honest with you. Jessica came over yesterday to pick up the kids. She told us practically everything. I got the rest from her later. I have to say, Ryan, she's playing a pretty smart game. Asking for money in the house was shithead's idea. They plan to use the money as a negotiating chip, which they will reluctantly do if you cooperate, grant the divorce, and allow him to adopt your children. He is childless and would like to bequeath his empire to someone. After your divorce, she convinces him that she wants to have a kid with him. After that, he will receive his fortune and she will maintain her way of life. If you can wait that long, Ryan, I am confident that she will lose interest in Jimmy and Maddie and return them to you. I looked at Catherine incredulously. However, there was a cold, sociopathic sense to it all. He already had a trophy wife, which answered my query about why he was attracted to Jessica, even though she wasn't particularly pretty. The allure of an obviously fertile wife would be a strong draw. However, I completely agree with Catherine's ultimate remarks. Jessica experienced severe preeclampsia both pregnancies, and her second C-section was due to it. She chose to undergo a hysterectomy at the same time. She apparently didn't notify her family or her new boyfriend about it. This, along with her other habits, revealed what a deceitful bitch my wife had become. What did Jessica look like when she spoke with you, Catherine? If you want to know how she felt about what she did to you, Ryan, the answer is guilty. She attempted to hide it, but I could tell it was ripping her apart. She realizes she has wrecked a decent man, but you know her. That will not stop her. How about you, Catherine? Why are you supporting me? It's simply the correct thing to do, Ryan. Growing up, my sister was always bullying me. What she's doing to you is simply wrong. It offends my sensitivities. Remember, I have been where you are today. I understand what it is like to be abandoned. You were there for me when I was upset about my error, but not Jessica. I'm delighted I get an opportunity to repay the favor. I am on your side, Ryan. I've always felt sympathy for you, and I can't imagine you being treated this way. Well, Catherine, I don't know what to say. I cannot make a commitment. No, that's stupid. I do not want us to sleep together. That would be too strange. Besides, I've been dating a guy for almost a month, and we're serious. I'm glad for you, Catherine. You have always been my favorite relative. I hope this guy is right for you. Thank you, Ryan. Simply trust me to assist in any way I can. Consider me your personal spy. After that, we hugged and she departed. I returned to Karen and our pals. By the evening, we had to call 3 more friends and explain what was going on. All of these expressions of support and sympathy were distressing. So much so that after dinner, we cooked together. We discussed the future. But first, we did. I took $200 lots from Catherine's hoard and gave one to Karen. The rest, I showed her where I'd placed it in the cookie jar with Catherine's present. I figured we'd make it until the following payday. I told Karen about Catherine's activities today. She was not surprised. Her infertility was becoming a concern in her marriage. Karen saw that I was always agitated at this time of day. I thought about it. It's 8:30 in the evening. For as long as I can remember, I've read stories to my children at this time before putting them to bed. I noticed tears in her eyes as she questioned, "What are we going to do?" My first priority is my children's well-being, and that certainly does not entail entrusting them to these schemers. So I must have the means to care for them. That involves finding money. I haven't determined how to exact my revenge yet, but the prospect of them going unpunished offends me greatly. How about you, Karen? Her exquisite face abruptly hardened. If you had simply sought for a divorce and provided me a fair part of our possessions, I would have been satisfied. I now feel humiliated. Please do not take this the wrong way, Ryan, but right now all I want is to see him burn. She said it with such passion that I resolved never to lash out at her. I grin, letting her know I understand. Okay, now we know. What? Let's talk about how we stayed up for another 3 hours discussing ideas. We reviewed and rejected every possible means to raise funds to hire lawyers. There was no satisfaction in being primarily law-abiding people. We focused our discussions on largely legal and ethical strategies of winning. We came to nothing, seeing no visible way out. I asked Karen to characterize the shithead's affluence. They relocated to town 2 years ago, and he took advantage of them by buying a house and a shop and then using the store, house, and boat as leverage. He borrowed $2.5 million for expansion. That was the only weakness I noticed. We spoke about how to exploit that weakness to attack him. If we could threaten his business, we'd have more influence to gain better appointments with the kids. I didn't care about money, but my children meant everything to me. Karen was all for burning down his shop, but I didn't feel right criticizing the means by which he made his living. Even for a lowlife like him, we went to bed too late on Sunday, Monday at work. I told my supervisor what was going on. He assisted me as much as he could. He granted me a short-term vacation and an advance on my annual leave. I attempted to complete my usual tasks, but it was difficult. I missed my kids every second of the day. In the afternoons, I gave up and just spent time with the comptroller and the administration's legal counsel. I should probably pause and tell you about the individuals I work with. People have a negative attitude toward those of us who work in local government. Everyone understands that it is a highly safe organization to work for. However, the remuneration there is poor. So virtually as social outcasts, we banded together to look after one another. If I was in charge of road work and we had some bitumen left over, let's just say neither the comptroller nor the lawyer had gravel driveways by the end of the day. I knew a lot more about business finance and legal boundaries than I did in the morning. Karen and I continued to talk about the day's events at home. She prepared dinner after spending the day looking for work. She worked as an accounting assistant before leaving to become a wife. We were winding down after cleaning up when the phone rang and a guest altered my life. At 7:30 p.m., the phone rang and I answered. "Daddy, where are you?" "Daddy?" It was Maddie. A lump threatened to block my throat. "I am here, honey, in our house. I do not like it here, Daddy, please." I could hear Jessica's voice at that point. Madeline, who are you speaking to? The phone then disconnected. Karen noticed the thunderous expression on my face and asked who it was. I answered Maddie and went to the door. Karen pursued me and attempted to hold me back. 5 feet and 2 inches versus 6 feet. 1 inch? Yeah, it was going to work. Don't, Ryan. That is what they want. They want to jail you for breaking a restraining order. Do not do it. That prompted me to stand up rather than walk out. I went upstairs to my bedroom to have some alone time with my emotions. I'm not sure how long I laid there, but then there was a faint knock on the door, and Karen went in with 3 children's books. So you read me a story. I stared at her. Then silently I motioned to her and made place for her to lie down beside me. I picked up Maddie's favorite book and began reading. By the end, I was calm again. I leaned over and kissed Karen on the forehead, just like I had loved Maddie for 8 years. She smiled. Until now, I had put thoughts of children to the back of my mind. The prospect of losing them or raising them in single-parent families was too hard for me emotionally. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I was taken aback when I saw Emma, who was never Sophie, standing there. She was Jessica's best friend, and we always got along great. I brought her inside and introduced her to Karen. Emma had difficulty making eye contact with either of us. After a brief talk, Emma stated, "I just wanted to apologize to you, Ryan. Jessica put me in a situation where I knew exactly what she was about to do. That's why I've seen you so little in the last 5 months. She made me pledge not to tell you about her affair. I apologize. I tried to talk her out of it, but you know how she is when she gets into anything. I knew she would divorce you and battle over the children." I remained silent when she stopped talking. In front of us stood a girl with a very troubled conscience. My first thought was that this was the enemy. If she expected sympathy, she would leave. Disappointed. Then it struck me. Perhaps a good person could have found another source of inside information here. Guilt may be a strong motivation. I just had to add a little something. "It's okay, Emma. I understand how difficult this situation has become for you. Thank you, Ryan. You are aware that she stopped our accounts and left me with no money, right?" "Yeah, I saw her tonight and she was bragging about it." I say bragged, but I believe it was simply bravado. I believe she feels a lot of guilt for what she did to you. Emma had previously found it difficult to maintain eye contact, but now she was looking directly into my eyes. For the record, Ryan, I did not trust what she stated about you hitting the kids. I've seen you in there chatting with Noah and Olivia, and I know you wouldn't do that. What? Didn't you know? She informed child services that you were bullying. She claimed they couldn't prosecute since there was no evidence, but the allegations alone were sufficient to obtain a restraining order. I slumped in my chair, shocked by the news. Damn slut, I was 5 times better than her parents. Both of my guests simply stared at the kaleidoscope of feelings that must have played out on my face. I disregarded everything but the last one, which was pure, unwavering hatred. When my racing mind finally settled down, I knew exactly what I needed to do. If one side in a conflict fights cleanly while the other fights nasty, the outcome is unavoidable. I knew I had to fight as filthy as I could get. Then I needed to develop a greater imagination. I am not sure how long it took me to obtain the capacity to talk. Will she stop at nothing to win? I had never raised my hand before. Yes, I can see it on your face, Ryan. As I already stated, what she told me didn't sound correct. I know a number of fathers who always go out with their sons to bars or fishing. I know you spend every free moment with your children. I have seen you with them, and I'm sure you'd be willing to go to any length to protect them. Damn right I would. They are my future. What a liar and con artist she is. Emma, do you know what her whole game plan is? We learned from another source that she plans to use our money in this house to acquire full custody of the children. Then she asked Karen's husband to adopt the children, promising him she will have one with him. Apparently, he is yearning for an heir. I'm sure she'll postpone attempting to have a child with him until they're married, claiming she doesn't want their child to be born outside of marriage. However, she is unable to have another Ryan. And I know it, and so do you. But Mike, Sucker Smith has no idea. By the time he discovers the truth, she will have swapped half of our modest home and bank accounts for half of his money. The collateral harm to me, the kids, and you is genuine. Jessica doesn't deserve any of your land. Me? Yes. You. What kind of best friend would lie to you about her husband abusing their children? I paused and watched Emma understand the final truth. Her best friend was a sociopath. Clearly humiliated, she excused herself and left. I attempted to go upstairs and indulge my feelings again, but Karen caught me and held me. Neither of us said anything. We simply enjoyed each other's company in silence. Two folks in anguish, looking for consolation. Eventually, I thanked her and we settled down for the night. I don't know how much sleep Karen got, but I certainly didn't get much. My resentment of Jessica's tactics fought with the pain I was feeling from Olivia's phone call. I guess I gave up around 4 a.m. when the outline of the plan was already comfortable for me. Karen woke me up by opening the curtains. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Breakfast is ready." After showering, I headed downstairs. Even though it was still early, I called my boss and asked for time off. He readily agreed. Karen just stared at me across the kitchen table. "Karen, how dirty do you want to get?" "Yes, David, I didn't realize you cared." She ruffled her hair flirtatiously in the back and smirked when she said that. I grinned back. "Cheeky bitch." "I meant, how dirty do you want this fight to get? Try me. What are you thinking?" "Nothing much. I'm just thinking about destroying your husband's business, destroying my wife's support base, and completely ruining her plans, leaving them both a quivering, broken wreck." "That's all. Sounds like a good start. I have some thoughts on that, too." We compared notes after breakfast while Karen poked around the internet and researched libel and slander laws. I called Jessica's mother. I turned out to be right. She had no idea that Jessica had involved children's services and was appalled by her daughter's tactics. I then called Catherine and repeated my story. She was going to disown her sister on the spot, but I convinced her to hide her disdain and become our Trojan horse. By the time I finished my calls, Karen had done her research and we compared notes. We then spent a friendly hour in the workshop making two signs. Half an hour later, Karen and I were seated in chaise lounges on either side of the main entrance to the building where Noah Brown worked. I knew from the research I had done that the building was on land leased from the local authority. We were not trespassing. Our chairs were in a prominent position, but in no way interfered with the flow of customers. I held a large sign that read, "Talk to me about how the owner of this store stole my wife and children from me." Karen held a sign that read, "Talk to me about my husband's morals." It soon became apparent that Karen's was getting more than I was. That was to be expected. She was much easier on the eyes than I was. A pattern soon emerged. People were reluctant to stop and talk when I was alone. But once one stopped, others felt comfortable enough to let curiosity override their restraint. When they stopped, I simply told them the facts of the story. Karen's research confirmed what we had both guessed. It's perfectly legal in our country to tell the truth. If we stuck to the facts, we didn't face libel charges. To our satisfaction, almost everyone we talked to had decided to shop elsewhere that day. People seemed genuinely offended by the actions of Jessica and shithead men by my story, women by Karen's. Although the impact on business was negligible, our plan was moving forward. In between Joe Public, we had some notable visitors. Just before lunch, the store manager came out to us and threatened to call the police. Karen filmed me offering to give him the emergency phone number for the police. The police did show up right after lunch, and after some discussion with the controllers, asked us to move our chairs back a bit so as to interfere less with traffic. Our faith in the success of the plan was strengthened around 4 p.m. when a reporter from a local radio station asked permission to speak with us as Karen and I told our stories. Quite a few people gathered. They seemed most interested in my accusation of child abuse. Child abuse is such a sensitive subject that the alleged perpetrator rarely brings it up. They disappeared, promising to stick to the facts, we told them. We stayed to say goodnight to the manager as he was closing the doors that evening, promising to see them in the morning. We were both thrilled with how we were covered on the local news that night. Of course, the next morning, we wished him a good day. Shortly thereafter, 2 uniformed security guards showed up and successfully got between us and our potential interlocutors. This time, I called the police. They arrived and spoke to the manager, presumably about his role in suppressing our right to free speech. I treated them to coffee from a van that had been set up to cater to the gathering crowd. We seemed to be the hottest entertainment in town that day. Karen helped us out by dressing in the perfect abandoned wife outfit. Holy crap, this woman could be an actress. She definitely has the looks for it. We didn't notice two guys in suits approaching us. We were too busy watching the state television news van parked across the street. By the time I was handed a cease and desist order, with the threat of being sued for loss of trade, currently estimated at $30,000 a day, the entire scene had been digitally taped. The suits hurriedly withdrew, leaving us to talk to a reporter about our little human interest story. Once again, we stuck to the facts and begged them not to embellish them in any way. I held a letter in my hand on which the letterhead of Slugged Ann and Pike was painted at the top. After another satisfactory day, we went home when the doors of the store were closed. Quite a number of people had stayed there to receive the promise of new entertainment, and it was evident that people were hesitant to run the gauntlet. We rushed home to watch the nightly news. I jokingly suggested that Karen get an agent. However, when our story aired, it became frustrating. The camera crew had set up outside the Crook's mansion. When I saw my bewildered children returning from school, being hurriedly let out of sight, it was like a knife to the soul. I read another story to Karen that night. We also received an average of 10 phone calls a day from friends and acquaintances expressing their displeasure with Jessica's actions. I thanked them and offered to vote for her friendship with my feet. Jessica must have become the loneliest woman in town. At 9:30 p.m., Emma knocked on the door. She didn't respond to my greeting. She just walked in and gave me a very tight hug, and when she broke the hug, she just put the memory card in my hand, turned, and ran away, tears streaming down her face. Intrigued, I carried it into the house, and Karen and I plugged it into the computer. Talk about a dynamite. It was a recording of Emma confronting Jessica about her lies to herself and children's services. It was a recording of Jessica's confession as she desperately tried to justify her actions. And it all lasted until Emma pulled herself out of her former friend's life for the last time. Our excitement diminished a bit when we realized that despite the illegal recording, the tape was of little value. We debated sending it anonymously to our new friends in the media, but that would have gotten him in trouble. Our newfound determination to be nasty had some limits. Unfortunately, the next day, when we were served by none other than Reginald Pike, LLB himself, there were no journalists around. He tried to do us both together, but we didn't want to cooperate. In the end, one of us had to film what was going on. We were each sued for a huge amount of money. What a waste of time. They, of all people, knew we were broke. After that excitement, we went back to our lonely vigil. Yes, I said lonely. There were very few people in the store that day. Perhaps the culprit was the sudden advertising of other stores that sold the same thing as Mr. Johnson's. It's easy to imagine how competitors, sensing his vulnerability, began to increase their market share. Shark meat feeding frenzy. During this time, we were filming ourselves and our fan club. Every time a truck arrived, we filmed it to the logo of the delivery company. On the side was especially clear. Maybe they could be persuaded to become former suppliers. At 2 p.m., two excited employees came out of the store. They said that they had been warned at a staff meeting to expect that they would have to give up their jobs. This was painful. Karen interviewed me, urging other good companies to consider hiring all the extra employees. That file went into the collection at 3:30 p.m. The state news vans suddenly reappeared. Just then, 3 more guys in suits showed up, but this time without ties in full view of the cameras. They announced that they too were attorneys. They were moved by our story and the injustice of what was happening. They offered us their services to defend our divorces pro bono. Is that what pro bono means? After the cameras stopped rolling, their chief, Brian Walker, explained that he is a former partner of Pike and Sugden, who was stitched up by the other two. Hell hath no fury like a scorned lawyer. We invited them to join Karen in her office at the coffee shop across the street. They were still there when my workday ended and I joined them. Over 15 cups of coffee, we left with signed papers that they would represent us in our divorces and in my fight for custody of the children. Old man Walker's eyes lit up when we told him about Emma's record, but we refused to give him a copy. Had he been a typical lawyer, he would have reached for an atlas to point her out on a map in response to any talk of ethics. By this point, our story was relegated to the public interest segment at the end of the news every other night or so. Our new friend Brian looked really good on the news that night. The open neck shirt looked good. Come to think of it, we had a classic relationship between a remora and a shark. Remora as our little fish that follow shark and get protection and tidbits from it. In return, the shark gets to live a parasite-free life. If Mr. Walker would like to think he's a shark, that's fine with me. That week and the first half of next week passed with only one development. I missed my offspring and Karen more and more, and numbed Maxim's buttock more and more. Mr. Walker made sure there was media coverage of our filing for an interim order to recover half of our liquid assets, for an order to vacate the premises, and for Jessica to deliver my children for visitation. The interest in our newfound celebrity also provided good coverage. Australians have always been supportive of the underdog. I think the state news reporter liked Karen too, which didn't hurt our cause. Perhaps it was the high-profile nature of the case that got us to the hearing on Monday of the following week. I was supposed to go first, and Karen was to go right after in preparation during the latter part of the week. I decided that Mr. Walker was also a bit of a dirty fighter. That was just one of the things I admired about him. We didn't go near Shithead's business on Thursday, but after learning that customers were sneaking back in, we resumed our vigil on Friday. I'm damn glad we did. At 9 a.m. on Friday, she had himself drove into the parking lot. He was followed by the highway patrol with blinkers. Maybe having a smirk with blinkers and customized license plates wasn't such a good idea. It took the guys in blue a good 6 minutes to find something amiss, but they succeeded. I waved happily as they drove out of the parking lot after handing over the ordinance. Karen videotaped Shithead entering his business through the front door. We wanted to prove that any interaction started on initiative and that he was the one who violated our restraining order. An hour later, Karen pointed to the parking lot where two other suited gentlemen were getting out of a car with a local bank logo. They headed for the store. Karen approached them. "It's the 24th today, isn't it? All day. Guess who had to pay off a loan yesterday?" I only grinned. We went to bed early. My vacation pay had just been transferred to a new bank account. It was an excuse for a modest celebration. We also went to the movies instead of our usual evening in front of the TV. That weekend, I had trouble sleeping since the first court hearing to decide the fate of my family was to be held on Monday. I was very nervous. Unexpected visitors on Saturday distracted us, albeit pleasantly. An old friend, Karen, saw the commercial and sought out her longtime pal. Then late in the afternoon, mother, father, and sister Jessica showed up. I stopped by the store and we had an impromptu barbecue. Karen entertained them all while I was gone. She was a hostess by nature. While I was gone, I pondered the motives of our guests. I suspected that now, knowing all the facts, Jessica's parents realized that I had righteousness on my side and suspected that I would prevail in the end. They wanted to ensure continued access to their grandchildren. Everyone had a pleasant time. At one point, Catherine managed to leave me alone. "How's your back, Ryan?" "Fine, Catherine. No sharp pains when the metaphorical knife stabs into your back." "What? Your sister's not happy?" "No, you're not playing by her rules, Ryan. You should be begging and pleading by now. Your little picket outside the store caught them off guard. Saying they're a little disgruntled is like saying the Pope is a little Catholic. Jessica is a fidget spinner, but of course she blames it all on you. Butter won't melt in my sister's mouth. Mom and Dad don't talk to her, and Emma was the first of her friends to leave the ship. According to my dear sister, she and her lover are afraid to even go to restaurants. It was mentioned by others, even at the country club. Keep it up, brother. You're winning. Dear, how sad. Never mind. How are the kids? Not bad, Ryan. They're a little sad and confused, as you'd expect. I get there every 2 days or so and play with them. Here, I've got some pictures. She pulled out her camera and I flipped through them. Tears came to my eyes. Only one of them showed my little Maddie smiling, and it was a forced smile. I thanked Catherine profusely for all she was doing, and we rejoined the other guests as we left the room. She pulled a bunch of keys out of her pocket and dropped them to the floor in an exaggerated gesture. Gosh, I think I dropped the keys to the Mercedes, your wife's car keys, and the spare key to the house on the floor. How careless of me. We both grinned again and returned to the straight world. Sunday morning, I had just woken up when I heard, "Hey, Sloppy, it's your turn to make breakfast," shouted to me across the hallway between my bedroom and the guest bedroom. I made breakfast, then wrapped a white towel around my waist, hung a tea towel on my arm, pretending to be a servant, and headed out for delivery. At 10 a.m., the third Monday of my vacation, Karen escorted me to the family court hearing. That's when I got my first good look at mixed shit. I realized it was him when Karen hissed and tensed when he walked in. In his 50s, he was fat and balding. I found out later that he had looked quite trim when he seduced her 15 years ago. Not being experts in family matters themselves, slugged it in, Pike had sent an assistant with them. He was an old friend of our Mr. Colson, but that didn't stop him from doing his best for his client. Colson first laid out his side of the financial issues, and the opposition responded in kind. Their tactic was that Jessica would need our assets to support her children. After Colson presented my motion for joint custody, he attempted to get an order that the children be interviewed by Children's Services staff to hear their views. Through legal niceties, the opposition overruled that attempt. Her boyfriend then consulted Jessica, who had been looking daggers at me all morning, and asked for a short break. For a few minutes, she and Colson whispered. Then Mr. Colson approached me. "Your dear wife wants you to know that if you don't back down, she will go public with all her accusations of your abuse of her and the children. She is willing to give up all claims to the house and money if you give up the children." I looked at Jessica, who was smiling smugly. Then I looked at Karen, searching for strength in her. She had been alternately smiling and frowning all morning, depending on whether we were winning or losing. Colson continued, "You know what you have to give me, don't you?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder and handed it to him. Emma had given me permission to do this as a last resort. Colson turned back to his opponent, and I watched the villain's face drop as he was shown a few edited moments. Their voices raised enough that I could hear some of the words unacceptable. "To hell with the media, we're among them." After a few minutes, Colson's opponent left the room. 10 minutes later, he returned and sat down next to Jessica without saying anything. The judge was called back to bed. The bad guy got up and became the good guy. "Your Honor, on behalf of my attorneys, I am compelled to inform you that due to new evidence, we can no longer represent the defendant in this case." Jessica looked stunned and confused. The judge confirmed the attorney's recusal, and we all watched him pack up and leave. I leaned over to Colson and he whispered in my ear, "Rumor has it that Messer Slugged, Id, and Pike have lost a bunch of business over this case, and a few more are threatening to leave. I guess our little record made them run away from some bad juju. Do not worry, the judge will see what today's little performance was all about. He's playing golf with my boss." Before I could ask where this was going, the judge made it clear he adjourned the case, giving Jessica 2 weeks to find another representative. He said he did not want to rule on the financial issues until the custody issues were resolved, which of course had not yet come to that point. He did not want to lift the restraining order because there were allegations of abuse that had yet to be argued in open court. 2 more weeks of separation from the kids. He adjourned to Karen's case. No reporters were visible outside the court. They were chasing a juicy, rare story about lawyers dumping a client that night. Slugged It and Pike released a statement that mentioned the words conscience and good judgment. Speculation flared with renewed vigor. Any sense of victory I had was muted. I missed my children. The tension was beginning to take its toll on Karen as well. She was beginning to feel guilty for surviving on my means. I reassured her, telling her I couldn't have gotten this far without her emotional support. I didn't feel like sitting outside the damn store for another 2 weeks. Getting media attention was getting harder and harder. I was already imagining how by the end of the week I would have to sit there naked just to get the camera's attention. I decided to skip Tuesday and just watch how many customers they had several times a day. Just after lunch, my phone rang. It was a mysterious guy named Henry who wanted me to meet him at a coffee shop across town. I asked Karen to watch us from afar with a camera to make sure nothing untoward happened, or if it did. Evidence was obtained. Henry turned out to be the assistant manager from the store. The cloak and dagger was to keep rumors from reaching us. Incredibly, he urged me to resume my post outside his store. It seems the bank was forcing Mr. Johnson to sell the store quickly and cheaply to cover the debt. They couldn't expect to repay the loan while he was at the helm. Henry and many other employees were secretly negotiating the bank to buy back the stock. Over this glad tidings, Karen and I gladly took our seats. More good news from the lawyers came later in the week. Karen handed them a bunch of documents when we engaged them. It seems that one of the items was an agreement made when the inheritance was transferred. Under it, she bought a stake in a business that was supposed to pay monthly dividends. That amount was invested back into the business, and the end result was an astronomical amount of money. Saturday was a day off. The store began to close that day to avoid paying overtime. We invited Catherine and her parents over for another barbecue, as well as a new old friend, Karen. Catherine briefly told us about the recent events at the Johnson mansion. Apparently, things were not going well. I was okay with that. Catherine thought it was paranoia that made Jessica suspect her of being a double agent and not welcome her visits over the last week. With no news about my kids, I was a little worried. We had just finished eating when the doorbell rang. I opened the door for Jessica. "Are you supposed to be here?" "Apparently, if I come to you, it'll be okay." I invited her in. She walked in but stopped when she saw her mother and father. Karen gave her a hateful look and then went upstairs where I assumed Catherine was hiding as well. The looks her mother and father threw at her weren't much better. Jessica was starting to look very uncomfortable and called me into the kitchen. "Ryan, for old time's sake, could you back off a bit? Why, dear, didn't the trade work out the way you thought it would?" "You know it didn't. I just thought that by taking all the money in the house, you'd be forced to give in and let Mick adopt the kids. Then when I'm married again, we can prove to the poor guy that you're no longer capable of having his child and take him for all he was worth." Jessica stared at the table for a long moment. "After I had his money, I was going to come back to you. Honestly, Ryan, I thought I could enjoy being a rich man's wife in the meantime, but you've ruined it. His business is failing and we can't even go out in public after that smear campaign you started. Last time we went to a restaurant, an old lady just spit on me. Don't mention the police. They've stopped me 3 times this week. I'm 3 points away from losing my license." I couldn't believe it. Tears came to my dear wife's eyes. "Can't you back off and let me realize my dream, honey?" "I thought you were a student of history, Jessica. Who said those who don't learn from the mistakes of history are doomed to repeat them? I compare your surprise attack on me and our family to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the British colonies in Asia on the 7th of December 1st, 941. Because of the nature of the attack, Churchill and Roosevelt had no choice but to demand the complete surrender of the attackers. If you had politely asked for a divorce before you did the dirty deed to our marriage, and that asshole you're copulating with had done the same, we could have split things up amicably and you could have lived happily ever after. Instead, you chose the Pearl Harbor method, and now I will accept nothing short of total surrender. I can't believe you think I'd trade my kids for money. Don't you know me at all?" I saw the realization dawn in her that she had been so focused on her long game that she had missed some minor details. Then came the realization that she wasn't going to get anywhere with her emotional approach. Her face hardened and took on an expression more recognizable to me. "So Mike wants to talk turkey tonight. Can you come?" "Yes, and I was born yesterday. Come to your place and get arrested for violating a restraining order." "Well, we could come here." "No, why not? Because if Noah Shithead Johnson comes within 100 yards of me, I'm going to rip his head off and spit in his neck." Jessica looked shocked. She'd never seen this side of me before. "Why? What did he do to you?" "Let me see. Honey entertained my wife for God knows how long and incited her to blow all my money. Stole my children. What's not to like about that?" Jessica stared at the table again. The thought of having to negotiate for my children and not rely on the whims of the court system prompted my next comment. "How about Skype?" "Yeah, that might work." "What time?" "Hold on, I have to coordinate with my partner." "What partner?" "Karen. We make all the decisions together." "That old bitch." "Who are you calling old? Have you looked at who you've been sleeping with lately?" "How old is she?" "You know, I don't care. She's been a good friend when I needed it. So who cares?" I went upstairs and discussed it with Karen. She was all for it. After all, what do we have to lose? Back downstairs, I made arrangements with Jessica for 9 o'clock at night. She left throwing an indecent look at her parents. The last thing she did was look around the house. And again, I swear she had tears in her eyes. I went back to the party, which ended around 8:30. I put my laptop on 2 chairs on the sides of the table. But Karen said she would sit off camera. She said if she didn't bat her eyes at Noah Johnson for the rest of her life, it would be too soon. At exactly 9 p.m., I logged into Skype and the screen showed the happy couple sitting side by side. Karen had showered and was sitting in her robe at the entrance to the kitchen. There were no introductory pleasantries. It was obvious from their actions and body language that here were two individuals vying for dominance. But I already knew they both had different goals in mind. By the end of the session, I realized that he was a little more dominant than she was. It was obvious from Johnson's opening gambit that he thought he was still in a bargaining position. So Brown, let's talk turkey. Let me make one thing clear from the outset, Mr. Brown or David, okay? I don't care which is which. Shit had clearly had and expected my firm voice. His eyes widened in shock and he glanced at Jessica with an edge of his eye. He realized he'd lost his first moral point. Okay, David, where's my skinny, barren ex-wife? Once again, I must remind you to be polite. She's listening, but she won't look at. Apparently, she never likes snakes. If you can't be polite, I'm going to stop this right now, understood? Point 2 was in my favor, and everyone knew it. I heard Karen chuckled softly at my use of the word snake. Jessica couldn't help herself. She looked at me like shit and frowned. Tell you what, David, you stop your little vigils at the store, maybe even get a press conference together and say it was a misunderstanding. Okay, I'll sign the house over to you and give you half the money back. Then I'll agree to let you see the kids every other weekend. I can't be much farther than that, can I? What about Karen? What do you care about her at this point? She'd had pushed Jessica off center stage. I'm willing to give her 10 to the profits once the business is profitable again. I looked at Karen. They say a picture paints 1,000 words in Karen's picture. The middle finger was resolutely raised above the rest. I smiled. Karen declined your kind offer. At least I think that's what it means. I repeated Karen's gesture toward the camera. As for your offer of visitation, I have to tell you that I have decided that neither of you can see my children. So you can shove your offer up your ass. Be reasonable, Mr. Brown. Once I have a child of my own, I won't give a damn about yours, and you can have them all to yourself. I looked at Jessica's reaction. She turned to shithead and frowned. But it wasn't the frown of a person who was angry that her chosen one had just signed away her children. It was the frown of a man annoyed that the cat had just been let out of the bag. So you want me to leave my children in the care of a man who looks at them like a bargaining chip? 12 days and 2 weeks. It's your choice whether or not to use Vaseline when you stick your proposal where the sun don't shine. Both of my opponents spoke at once. Jessica had won this contest. Come on, Ryan. You're not still mad that I left you for a better man, are you? At that moment, Johnson rose and stood behind Jessica. He put his arm around her. I watched what was happening. It was obviously a premeditated tactic and meant that they were recording our conversation, hoping to elicit a strong reaction so they could show it in court. Somehow, I was not moved at all by the sordid spectacle before me. However, I was not indifferent when a bare arm came around my shoulders from behind and something very soft and warm pressed against my neck. Be a gentleman and don't look back for a minute, they whispered in my ear. Karen then turned my head and kissed me on the lips. After a couple of moments, she broke the kiss and we both looked at the screen. A stormy expression appeared on Jessica's face. Most people fool themselves to one degree or another when they look in the mirror. However, the difference between what Jessica saw in the mirror every day and what she saw on the screen was too great for illusions. She suddenly realized what bargaining really meant. Get your hands off my husband, bitch. I turned and whispered in Karen's ear, feeling the warmth on her neck. Nice tactic, she replied with a whisper. I expected him to pull something like that. Not her, but, well, remember, don't look back. The warm feeling disappeared after that. Much to my dismay, I kept my promise and didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The little selfie in the top corner of the screen was already visible. What? I may be a gentleman, but at the end of the day, I'm human. Both people on the other end of the connection were mumbling something, but in my reverie, I had no idea what. Then the doorbell rang. While Karen got dressed, I went outside to open the front door. It was my kids. As soon as the door opened, they wrapped their arms around me, mumbling incoherently. Noah, cradled against my chest, was snuggled against one side. Maddie snuggled against my other leg. Once again, I fought back tears. I was in seventh heaven. All I could hear was the intermittent words. Aunt Catherine gave me the camera. Karen showed up and I asked her to keep our internet friends occupied for a while. Then I took the kids to a quiet place. When they calmed down, I got a story out of them, one at a time. They both had sore feet as they walked through the night after sneaking out of the mansion. Aunt Catherine gave Noah a camera, and he recorded his mom saying, "Eat your own damn breakfast." Both kids were shaking from hunger and fatigue. I brought them glasses of milk and told them to drink slowly. I also told them to wait here, and a nice woman named Karen would come and watch them in a minute. Back in the kitchen, I gestured for Karen to come in and asked her to watch the kids. I then took a very deep breath and sat down in front of my laptop. Jessica read something on my face and fell silent, but shithead couldn't take it anymore and spoke up. I just wrote him, "Jessica, where are the kids?" "Upstairs in bed." "No, they're not. They just walked through the dark to get here." I paused to contain my anger again. Shithead. They're both telling me they didn't eat properly. Jessica was the first to recover from those hissed accusations. "We'll come and get them soon." "No, you won't. The day I leave them alone with you, a pair of assholes, I'll see Satan skating to work if I see you anywhere near here. I'll take whatever physical measures I deem necessary to keep you from seeing them." Shithead grinned triumphantly. He'd gotten the thread he'd been counting on. "Thanks, asshole." After that, the connection went dead. I checked that the conversation was recorded on my end and went to find the others. Maddie was sitting on Karen's lap, chatting about her favorite subject horses. Noah was sitting next to her, peering into her face. I pulled out the rest of the pizza and again asked them to eat it slowly. I knew what was coming next, so I took the camera from Noah and copied it to my laptop. I created a folder and put the camera files with Emma's voice recording and the Skype session file in it. I fast-forwarded the part of the Skype recording that had the snippet I wanted and noted the time. Along the way, I took a picture of Maddie's wrists and added it to the folder. It was another half hour before the doorbell rang. I had just enough time to hug both kids until they calmed down and called Catherine and asked her to come over. When I was done, Karen was reading a story to the children. Two female childcare workers knocked on my door at about 10:30 p.m. I invited them in and offered them drinks. They were defensive and hostile and insisted they had come to return the children to their mother. "I'm afraid this is unacceptable to me." They tried to insist, but I sat them down, showed them the bruises on Maddie's wrist, and made her tell me how she got them. I made Noah describe his hunger strike, then showed them a video of Jessica yelling at them and a short clip of Shithead saying, "Once I have a baby of my own, I won't care about yours, and you can take them back. So you're really going to send them back to that Wednesday after they were allowed to walk around here in the dark?" They both looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have to enforce the current order. You have been accused of abusing and your wife. If we leave them here and they get hurt, we're in big trouble. We have superiors to whom we must answer." I purposely kept my voice quiet as I replied, "I can tell you that if you put them back in an atmosphere where you have evidence, not just claims, and they get hurt again, I'll be the one to answer to. Are you threatening us, sir?" "No, just giving you an idea of what life will be like before the older of the two might contact the cops." I recommended an alternative plan. I told them that my wife's sister was on her way over. If everyone agreed, I would cheerfully hand them up to her as a neutral party, as long as both parties promised not to take them away from her. The elder woman withdrew for a time, presumably to phone Jessica, and then came back and claimed the deed was done. I guess Jessica and Shithead were delighted about it. I suppose they were idly cheating on me by catching me in a trap where I threatened them on film. So I said goodbye to my children with a heart promising to do everything I could for them. They both liked Aunt Catherine, so they took it naturally. Karen said nothing as I disappeared to get emotional again. The next day, Karen offered to go to Catherine's house and assist get the kids ready for school. I agreed for the remainder of the week. She picked them up at school and drove them to Catherine's. I left for work because there was no purpose in extending the vigil. Henry confirmed by phone that the business was running negative and that his plans were on track. The next Monday, we stood before the same judge. Jessica and I had already agreed on everything except custody, so everyone was focused and ready. Karen came first, and both sides discussed her financial concerns with Mr. Johnson, including unpaid dividends. Mr. Johnson evidently hoped this would not come out, and he nearly passed out when it did. The conspirators' interests were represented by an out-of-town business, which, from what I could tell, was not very good. The judge would not rule on the actual sums until forensic accountants calculated the worth of the unpaid dividends, But he did state that after Karen's dividends were paid, the total share would be $6,135. He admitted that he had been harsh due to Mr. Johnson's unpleasant behavior. Karen stated that she was pleased for Mr. Johnson to maintain the house after paying his portion as a status symbol. She understood it was essential to him, but she did not want to live there. In my case, their lawyers erroneously requested that an illegal Skype recording of our conversation be accepted as evidence. We quickly agreed, which baffled their lawyers. They, of course, only played back the part in which I threatened them. That, together with Jessica's evidence that I abused her and the children, was intended to paint me as the villain. I sat stoically and endured before going to trial. Catherine and Emma were brought in, and it was widely considered that I was a far superior father than Jessica was a mother. Catherine's remarks were so powerful that the judge asked her to clarify that she was Jessica's sister and not mine. Jessica couldn't believe the betrayal and fled the courtroom for both sessions. Then it was my turn. Mr. Colson guided me through the description of the initial ambush. The children are walking to my residence at night. He was able to extract information about the hunger strike from me, including the fact that the children's mother and foster father were unaware of what was going on. He delivered the children's testimony, acquired by Child Services, on these and other issues as the opposition showed the Skype recording. They were unable to object when we showed them the rest of the recording, specifically Jessica's reaction when her partner stated that he did not care about my children. Colson sought to introduce the footage taken by Noah. The opposition attempted to deny the motion by using the rules of evidence. The judge took offense. Gentlemen, this is not a criminal courtroom. The same regulations do not apply here. My job is to do my best for the children of the marriage, and I take that role seriously. Mr. Colson, you may show the videotape, and while you do, may I listen to the second recording that was rumored last time? So I met Jessica, who had cringed when they heard her scold at her own children to go get their own breakfast. It didn't compare to their gasps when a 10-minute tape was shown of Jessica admitting to Emma that she lied to Child Services about me bullying her and the kids. On the tape, she stated that it was entirely Noah Johnson's idea. The judge simply stared at her for the final 4 minutes of the tape. Her head was buried between her fists. Noah wasn't pleased either, I suppose. I slugged it in pike. When the opposition attorney was asked whether they had any answers, they never explained why they recused themselves. He simply stood there, his mouth opening and shutting like a goldfish. The judge stated he had one question for me, and I knew what it was. Mr. Brown, could you please clarify the blatant threat you issued to Mrs. Brown and Mr. Johnson? I should also say that I've heard tales of threatening behavior against child support workers. I was well prepared for this adjustment. The man intended to utilize an emotional argument in an argument with another man. I had done my research and prepared everything well. I stood up and stared him squarely in the eyes. Yes, Your Honor. I can. You've heard the same proof as I have that my children were taken from me due to neglect and abuse. I've always believed that it was my responsibility as a father. No, not that word. It is my privilege to safeguard my children from harm. I am willing to die for my children, just as I am sure you are. Your Honor, the fact that I jeopardized my freedom by threatening my abusers didn't bother me. Yes, I threatened them, and I would do so again in a heartbeat. For a second, I assumed the judge was about to be embarrassed and applauded. I could see admiration in his eyes. He nodded to me before withdrawing to contemplate for a bit. He came back less than an hour later. I was given complete custody of the children, and Jessica's access to them was at my discretion. I heard Walker say that this was something he had never seen before. The judge determined that all legal costs would not be reimbursed by utility funds. I was granted the house with 65% of the liquid assets. Again, the judge conceded that he was tough on Jessica because of the tactics she used during the ambush. You could practically see the smoke from the journalist's pencils. A handful of them approached me outside of court, but I don't remember what I said. I was on cloud 9 at that time. Karen took the kids home, and I collected all of their belongings from the mansion. Jessica and Shithead were yelling at each other the entire time I was there. At home, I simply loved and cuddled my children. That night, the little damn stragglers preferred Karen to tell them bedtime stories instead of me. They claimed she was better at it. Okay, fair enough. After reading each of their books approximately 1,000 times, I became tired with them. Karen and I hosted a party the next night, and Mr. Walker and his staff were the guests of honor. There were 2 journalists at the party, so maybe Mr. Walker received the attention he deserved. I overheard him mention pro bono to one of them. The entire Jessica family was present, as were the majority of our shared friends and some of Karen's growing circle of new acquaintances. Even my supervisor showed up and made some nasty remarks about having a star working in his field. I proposed a toast to Catherine, upgrading her to the status of favorite aunt. It was late in the day when the party was reduced to a family gathering. I sat at the table alongside Catherine and her mother. William was sleeping on one of the couches on the other. Karen was reading a story to the children. My mother-in-law had a burning question. "Ryan, how often do you plan to let Jessica visit the kids?" This question had been on my mind since this morning. "I do not know, Mom. I suppose it depends on what she wants. If she wants to see them, I will not stand in her way. After all, children need the influence of a caring lady in order to grow up balanced, don't they?" My ex-mother-in-law simply sat back and shook her head. "Ryan, as a brilliant man, you can be a genuine credence at times." "What the hell? Your children are sitting there with a woman they plainly love and who clearly adores them. And you." I spun so rapidly that I nearly knocked over a chair. Karen looked up and noticed 3 individuals staring at her, one of whom was looking incredulous. She blushed deeply when she realized what was going on. I rose up and moved gently towards the couch. I realized my next sentence will not win any honors, but it was sincere. "The mother of these children appears to have left her position. Do you want to apply for the job?" My response was a woman who, as if by magic, rose off the couch and melted into my arms. We kissed long and deeply. The youngsters were acting like sardines again, snuggling up to us. Everything felt so right. We put the kids to bed and bid farewell to our guests. I carried Karen into our bedroom. On the threshold, she spoke. "Have you asked me to marry yet?" "Yes. Foolish. I did. I thought I did." "Did I say yes?" "Not formally, I assume. Why?" "Well, I'm certainly not cut out to be a working foreman or an engineer." "Perhaps you could return to school once I have more money." "That sounds fantastic to me." Anyway, who isn't up to what? Grandma, epilogue. Basically, Jessica never contacted me about visiting the children. They never inquired about her since Karen was too busy. The bank facilitated the selling of the store to a group of managers and employees. Henry, a local celebrity, asked me to reveal a large, under new management sign to draw media attention. By the conclusion of the first week, the store had resumed operations. My bank account quickly got less than Karen's, as agreed. She simply took cash, while her ex took the mansion and enough capital to start again. Jessica and Noah were still together, according to family rumors. Perhaps things would have remained that way if I hadn't met Mr. Johnson one day. He made a sarcastic remark, removing the smile off my face as his appeal began. Apparently, his legal team believed some evidence should have been excluded. I requested Mr. Walker to keep an eye on the court registry for me. He realized that everything was on hold as the happy couple embarked on a month-long cruise in the West Indies. It was purely coincidental that Mr. Johnson received a fax while they were standing in port. Jessica Brown, who had been released following a C-section and hysterectomy, was given simple instructions for her care. 9 years ago. How did I know the ship was parked in a country where it is strongly frowned upon when males hit women? As a genuinely honest person, I never asked Karen how all those homeless individuals got into the mansion and wrecked it to the point that it was untenable. After all, if I find evidence of a crime, it is my civic obligation to report that it isn't. Who knew that insurance companies refuse to pay out money when customers leave their homes unattended for a month? Where did I put the keys that Catherine gave me? Was that the burned-out Mercedes I saw on the side of the highway yesterday at the end of my first year at university? I offered to work part-time until graduation to help care for our baby. Karen, on the other hand, expressed concern about how long she could put up with being the wife of someone with no qualifications. Looking back at Ryan's story, we can see that life is not always what we expect it to be. Betrayal can come suddenly, but how we face and overcome those challenges is what truly matters. Ryan didn't let the shock of losing his wife and children break him. Instead, he fought relentlessly to protect what mattered most to him. Life will always throw difficult situations our way, but it's our attitude and actions that ultimately lead us to success. This story is not just about perseverance and courage, but also a reminder that in life, we don't always have to silently endure. If you're facing struggles or challenges in your own life, never give up. Stand up, fight, and protect the things that matter. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more engaging and meaningful videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you in the next video.